Hello, hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk Ray Bradbury. I am slowly burning my way through a collection of 100 Ray Bradbury stories. I take each story, read it, do a synopsis, and then give a few thoughts. Otherwise, I guess you'd call it a review. Today, we are looking at Any Friend of Nicholas Nickleby's is a Friend of Mine. In 1929, in a town called Greentown, Illinois, a young boy named Ralph Spaulding is sweeping hair clippings for the barber Mr. Wineski. It seems to be an endless summer, and he is bored beyond belief. One day, a train rolls into town, and a man gets off, calling himself Charles Dickens. Obviously, it's not the real Charles Dickens. He stays at Ralph's grandmother's boarding house and employs young Ralph to write down his stories, his books, as he recites them. He's actually helping him write down A Tale of Two Cities as if he was writing it for the first time that day. The presence of Mr. Dickens in town upsets Mr. Wineski, who, like Dickens, is a single, lonely man, and as it turns out, young Ralph was actually Mr. Wineski's only friend, and he misses having him at the shop, and he thinks that Mr. Dickens has taken away his friend. So, he feels lost, and he sort of has an outburst, and he yells at Mr. Dickens. This sort of upsets Mr. Dickens and makes him face the fact that he's been impersonating Charles Dickens for years. He tells us a story how he was a writer. He wanted to be a writer. He wrote endlessly for 30 years, and not a scrap of it was any good, according to him. So he sort of lost his mind. He took a train across the country. He began throwing pieces of his writing out of a large trunk out the window of the train. And at the end of the ride, he realized that his beard had grown long and he kind of looked like Mr. Dickens. And inexplicably, from years of trying to imitate Mr. Dickens, he had memorized his works. So he's ready to leave town now because he's become a disruption and he's been forced to face the reality of his mental breakdown. But Ralph convinces him to stay a while and he introduces him to a young librarian calling herself Emily Dickinson. They get married, they travel, and they send postcards to Ralph explaining how they're now making a living sort of impersonating their respective authors. It is a absolutely delightful story. I enjoyed it immensely. I was not expecting that. I may have read it in the past. I don't remember, though. I think this is my first reading of this story, and it was great. It's a great little tale. I can really relate to it. It's about a wannabe author, and, I have a degree in English literature and writing. Writing was my concentration in college. I have a bachelor's degree. And although I learned a lot of things about writing in college, I sort of lost the ability to write freely. I became so self-critical and sort of fear of being judged that I've barely written anything in the last 10 or 12 years since I got out of college. But I understand that, and I also understand this artist's sort of fear of madness and sort of the feeling of madness. It's sort of a trope with artistic types. We all seem to be a little bit crazy. I can relate to that as well. But in this case, Bradbury takes the idea of the insanity of an artist literally and gives us a character who is impersonating Charles Dickens. I also understand the loneliness theme here. Mr. Wineski is an old man, has a barbershop, and the little boy, who's his employee, pretty much his only friend. And then Charles Dickens, obviously a lunatic, sweeps into town, intrigues and befriends young Ralph, and sort of feels like he's taking him away from him. I think we can all relate to sort of having friends that we've drifted away from in our lives and watch them drift sort of into the lives of other people, and then you feel like you're neglected and you sort of wonder again, is that something wrong with me? Is this involving this sort of eccentricity or madness that is so common among artists? So it's all sort of a strange circle or loop that I think anybody who sort of has an artistic personality or is into creativity and creating, I think you can relate to that, because there's always this fear of sort of alienation and loneliness, but also a need to create and be creative and to express yourself honestly as opposed to hiding yourself. So it's all a vicious circle that anyone who is into the arts can certainly relate to, and you will relate to this story for that reason. It was a movie, I think, in the 80s. Definitely deserves sort of a high quality modern remake. I think you could do it well. Get like Anthony Hopkins or somebody like that to play Dickens. And I think it would be a great movie. I think it would be, in the right hands, very much the type of film that could be Oscar season fodder. So yeah, guys, any friend of Nicholas Nickleby's is a friend of mine. Once again, a delightful Ray Bradbury story, one of the best that I've read from him recently in this collection. We'll be back soon with our next story, which is The Garbage Collector, as I continue to work my way through Bradbury stories. So thank you for tuning in, and see you soon.